Great. So we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are logging in from. Thank you all for joining us at our very first DoD JHE Community of Practice meeting. My name is Adrienne Tadella, and I'm the Knowledge Management Specialist here at the Center for Global Health Engagement of the Uniformed Services University for the Health Sciences. CJHE for short is the convener and facilitator of this community of practice. We're really glad that you are all joining us today. So before I lay out the agenda for today's session, I want to thank the folks for participating in our welcome polls. It seems that a lot of you are coming from the US, and then there are some from outside of the DMV region as well. So a couple of housekeeping reminders for you all. Please note that we are recording this session, and we will share the recording in addition to the presentation deck and other materials in our follow-up email through our mailing list, as well as we will post these event materials on the MillSuite platform. We also encourage everyone to use video if you're able to, and request that you do mute your mics whenever you're not speaking so we can...
Anyway, you got some reading material for you.
Okay, sounds good.
I believe the speaker went on mute.
Adrienne, you're muted.
Muted myself. There you go. And then finally, for any questions and comments that you may have throughout our presentation, please feel free to drop those in the chat, and we'll be sure to take them back up during our Q&A and general discussion towards the end of the presentation. Our team is also on the line for any technical and audiovisual issues that you may have, but a best practice for me anyways is that if you do lose connection, if you can't hear or see anything on the line, you can log out and log back in, and that usually resets the system. So our planned agenda for today will first introduce the mission and objectives of the community of practice and where it sits in the wider knowledge management program that we have here at CJHE. This will then be followed by our first perspective exchange with our guest speaker, Dr. Kevin Riley, who is CJHE's Chief of Staff. The Q&A and discussion for that session will be facilitated by my colleague, Dr. Ramey Wilson, our Senior Advisor for Knowledge Management here. And then after that, we will do a demo of our community page on MillSuite, how you can access it, and key features on the site that you can use to contribute and engage and exchange with other members of the community. And then finally, we will close with a list of additional resources, upcoming events, and next steps for you all. All right. So to share an overview of our COP, I'll hand over the mic to my colleague, Dr. Ramey Wilson. In his role as Senior Advisor for KM, Dr. Wilson has been a key champion for KM, particularly in its functional role in connecting and coordinating information and knowledge across the global health engagement space, and also for medical interoperability and expeditionary care. In addition to his work at CJHE, Dr. Wilson is also a hospitalist in North Carolina. Dr. Wilson retired as colonel after 20 years of active duty service in the U.S. Army, where he served in a wide range of clinical and operational roles with medical, conventional, and special operations units. So, Dr. Wilson, over to you.
Okay, great, Adrienne. I wasn't prepared for that introduction, so thank you. But I'd like to welcome everybody, and I'm real excited. You can see I'm so excited. I dressed up for the event that this is kind our first event. And, this has been a long time coming. I think this is something that those of us that have been in the global health engagement space have wanted for a while. We've tried to do it a couple different times. And so this is our really dedicated effort. But I want to let you know that this is something that, has been identified as a need to have a community practice and kind of a knowledge management program for global health engagement for some time. So you can see on the slide there that the J. Rockham document that was signed out by the Joint Staff, basically recommending the establishment of a joint GHE knowledge management structure, came out several years ago. And even more recently, the Uniformed Services University, of which the Center for Global Health Engagement is one of its centers, deliberately changed, or the DoDI directing the mission of the Uniformed Services University specifically called out knowledge management for global health engagement as one of the specific roles of the university. So we're really excited to have that as a requirement and to kind of continue to build, hopefully, upon some momentum that we've gained over the last couple of years. Next slide, please. So, I'm keenly aware that everyone maybe has a different understanding of what KM is. I know for me, when I was still on active duty, you said KM. I had a little scar tissue based upon some previous KM efforts at some of my units that, didn't necessarily get implemented, I think, or weren't resourced the way that they necessarily needed to be. And so what I want to tell you is that we are really committed to making this people focused. And so the whole idea of knowledge management is that we want to get the right information to the right people at the right time to make the right decision or the best recommendation. And so at the end of the day, the person that we're trying to enable are people. And you are part of that people. And if anything, hopefully this community of practice will continue to grow and be part of that lifeblood. And so we are committed to do this. And in general, if we say we're going to be a learning organization and we don't actually have a knowledge management program to capture lessons learned, to implement them in a system, performance improvement system practice, we can't really say we're a learning organization. And we want to be part of an organization that grows and adapts as the challenges come. So we're excited about that. Next slide, please. And so, I think a lot of times for KM, a lot of knowledge management revolves around a technology platform. And so what we want to do is reframe that, in that our knowledge management program is going to focus around people. Obviously, technology is going to play a role in that. But we're really trying to take more of a kind of entrepreneurial startup approach and use the systems that we already have, how we can build and grow that. And then as the requirements and the needs come back from our community of practice and our practitioners, as well as our customers at the combatant commands, at the Joint Staff, and the services, we can adapt to what those requirements are. And so, these are our goals, is that we want to perform and coordinate, we want to learn and adapt, and we want to innovate. Now, we fully recognize that, in a community of practice, especially, different people are going to have different levels of engagement in terms of global health engagement. You have some people, like maybe it's your full-time job if you're like an international health specialist. Other people, it may be something that you do every once in a while. Other people, it may be that you're just interested in this in general, or maybe you have some experience that you'd like to contribute. We would like everybody to be involved, right? We'd like this network to connect other networks. We'd like this to not necessarily break down silos, as connect silos, because we know that silos sometimes exist for a reason. But we want to be able to leverage the knowledge of the group in order to make us all better. And so, next slide, please. So this is kind of the approach that we're taking as a group. We're taking 5 major focuses in terms of knowledge management. One is innovation. One of them is providing information. So one of them is like medical options, which has kind of started it all, which is a data knowledge management program about partner medical capabilities for assessments that are done by uniformed clinicians and planners. Thinking about process, thinking about engagement, and then about the community. And then we think of the community as the community focus as being how we train and educate and prepare people that are interested or have been tasked to do global health engagement so that you can do it the best you can and you're properly equipped. And then how do we take people that have been trained or have interest and create a community of practice that can then orient all of these other processes around. And so that's kind of the focus of what we're trying to do. And so I'm going to pass this back to Adrian right now to discuss specifically our GHA practitioner network. And then in a few minutes, I'll get a chance and the honor to introduce Dr. Riley, who is our subject matter expert we're going to be talking to today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rami. All right. So as Rami had mentioned, the COP speaks to that community domain of our wider CAM approach. And this is because connection is the essence of knowledge management. It's a key ingredient for us to create spaces where knowledge sources and users can meet and exchange with each other. The vision that started the community of practice is that when GHE practitioners belong to a more connected and more informed professional network, they will be better equipped to not only plan, but also to organize, execute, and evaluate GHE activities in support of tactical, operational, and strategic goals and policies, which then ultimately support our national security objectives. So in order to do that, we again have to create a space where information and knowledge can flow between these sources and users, in this case, our GHE practitioners, all of you, and then develop activities that can facilitate such flow, and then develop products as well to document and capture information and knowledge explicitly. So in the spirit of being practitioner-centered and member-driven, we really see ourselves as facilitators to your needs and interests, which will inform how the community runs and evolves along the way. We have some illustrative examples over here on this slide of products and activities, one being this quarterly webinar. The next one will be in June, so stay tuned for that. But we have also prepared a survey that we'll share towards the end of the presentation to capture your ideas and recommendations on topics that you would like for us to discuss, invite experts to come in and talk about, on resources that you might be looking for, GHE related skills and competencies you want to learn, and the like. So like I said, we'll share the survey at the end of the presentation, and we'll give you some time to respond to it. And this is really how we will move forward based on your interest and feedback for us. And then thinking long-term and speaking to interoperability within this space, we also see the community of practice evolving in many different ways. And one thing to just keep in mind is one of those ways is expanded access to interagency partners and our counterparts from our allied and partner nations. So it could eventually mean transitioning to a more accessible platform in the future. But for now, our main platform will be on MillSuite. Okay. And so to put faces on the folks that will be reaching out, engaging with you primarily, here is our CJHE facilitation team for the community of practice. I've already introduced Dr. Wilson and myself, but we have two more members with Ms. Maria Echeverry, who's our communications specialist. She's in charge of our external messaging and marketing campaign. So you will be receiving a lot of emails and products from her. And then we also have Ms. Mariam Siddiq, who is our research assistant, helping mainly with medical options, our knowledge database for partner medical capability assessments, as well as research on misinformation and disinformation. For MillSuite and for any communication by email, you'll be hearing from mostly ourselves. And then, so with that, if you have any questions or comments at all about the kind of the overview of the community of practice, please drop them in the chat. But now I will share the mic back to Rami, who will introduce Dr. Kevin Riley and the presentation for today.
Okay, great. Thank you, Adrian. All right, so it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Riley. Dr. Riley currently serves as the Chief of Staff for the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences Center for Global Health Engagement, and is an assistant professor in the Department of Military and Emergency Medicine. In his current role, he is responsible for managing and coordinating a professional staff involved in a variety of projects within select regional combatant commands in the area of military global health engagement activities, as well as overseeing the operational execution of the multitude of tasks within the center's mission domain. Dr. Riley graduated from Wayland Baptist University with a degree in healthcare administration and was commissioned in the United States Air Force in 1985. He completed a PhD in health policy in 2005 from St. Louis University, where his dissertation was on evaluation of international HIV programs. His last military assignment was as faculty at the Uniformed Services University in the Department of Military and Emergency Medicine, where he worked closely with and as the deputy director of the newly founded Center for Disaster and Humanitarian Assistance Medicine. Interestingly, his arrival at USU was actually also when I started medical school at USU, so it's been a pleasure knowing him for so long. After military retirement, he continued as the deputy director of CIDM until it was closed in 2016, where a large majority of that center was converted into the Center for Global Health Engagement, where he's served as the chief of staff since its establishment. He wrote a chapter on program management and assessment in Conflict and Catastrophe Medicine textbook, and has had multiple articles on issues touching the effective and safe delivery of care as part of expeditionary planning and measures of effectiveness. Dr. Riley's cumulative experience is based on more than 40 years of direct participation, management, and coordination of military health engagement programs and missions in the areas of disaster preparedness and response, public health capacity building, civil military operations. He has specific experiences in humanitarian assistance and contingency operations planning, as well as execution during contingency operations from Panama in 1989 through Operation Desert Storm, Haiti, Kosovo, and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Personally, I'm a better person for knowing and working with Dr. Riley at different points in my own career, both in the military and post-military. He is an educator, leader, mentor, friend, and personal inspiration. He's demonstrated a life of selfless service and is a career that has crossed the arc of the Cold War, the contested invasion into Panama, large-scale combat operations in Desert Storm, the almost invasion in Haiti, and the following humanitarian response: humanitarian and complex emergencies in the Balkans, special operations during the initial Iraq invasion, stability operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now as we return to preparing for large-scale combat operations that echoes the themes and preparations of the Cold War. For those of you that worked with him, you know that his heart is for people, relationships, and the people he works with, whether it was including his family as role players during Operation Bushmaster, advocating for advancement, or bringing back food samples from his travels, or having snacks around the office. He always looks out for those under his charge. We were just talking this morning about how he was on the ground during the Panama invasion and how the mental strain on the triage officers took such a toll on clinicians that they had to rotate them out. His focus is on the mission and the people who make it happen. So with that intro, I consider a real honor that we get to hear from him on our inaugural DoD GHE Community of Practice Perspectives Exchange. We're planning for you to ask questions after his comments if time allows, so please post those in the chat. If we're unable to get to your questions, we hope to post comments in our Community of Practice site. We've asked Dr. Riley to prepare a couple of slides that consolidate what he feels has been the development of global health engagement over the past 30 years, how it is adjusted to the requirements, and the key principles or takeaway that he would want those operating or entering in this field to know about or consider. I know that often we look around and wonder, how did we get here? And I found that often the answer lies in the path that got us there. So knowing some of the history can help our understanding going forward. So Dr. Riley, thank you for joining us. Congratulations on your upcoming second retirement, and we look forward to your comments and the chance to ask some questions at the end.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. So when I was asked to prepare some slides for this, the first thing I thought of is how far back do we go? Because global health engagement in any form and terms go back to any military engagements from conflict in World War II, the Marshall Plan, subsequent activities in Vietnam, Korea, and then activities as we progress in this one too. And what we track on is for here at the center, and I think historically we can look back at where did this language really start to develop from. So I put in here and I says it probably starts when someone decided that we needed to codify and identify health engagements and stability operations and global health engagements as a definitive mission and role and responsibility within DoD. So so just a little bit historical here. Back in 2005, and obviously these DoDs are in development a couple of years prior to the release windows, but we have a situation in Iraq where the term of the day was SSTROs, Security, Stability, Transition, Reconstruction Operations. It's very linear, but as soon as security was collapsing, there could be no stability, there was no transition, there was no reconstruction efforts. And the NGOs that came in there could not maintain or operate in those environments. So they left. Well, DoD had a primary role of still maintaining security, but government came back and said, not so fast, DoD, you have some responsibilities here, including getting the infrastructure back up online, including health. But that was a peripheral responsibility to the Department of Defense, not a primary. Well, DoD specifically in 2005, that changed and said now it will be equal to combat operations. So let's morph up a little bit. Now we get into language where we're moved away from SSTRO, now we're stability operations, but so specific is medical, so unique is medical that it gets its own term, medical stability operations, generating in a new DoD in 2010 that looks at the problematic issues associated with operating and practicing medicine in foreign countries. And it identifies and focuses for the first time on keywords like partner nation. And then we move into what I would say is the current idea, which is shifting away from, not shifting away from those goals and those issues, but getting back to the basic, what's the primary strategic goals we want to achieve to? So the final DoD, which was written in and very much to a large effort of the center and authors that are even online here today, that were writing this language to push back, not push back, but to push forward the theme that we do all these based on larger strategic objectives and regional goals. So that's where historically we get to the key points of today. Next slide. So out of that new DoD, we get 3 basic priorities for GH activities. And none of these terms say health at all. But when we take a look at them, we realize that health probably does this in its own mindset because it cannot operate. So whether we look at whole of government, whole of society, or we just look at strategic objectives, we cannot operate in this space autonomously, not effectively. Next slide. So building partner nation capacity really requires, in my opinion, this is from a historical perspective, these are the 3 things that DoD has historically been asked to do or can do, and it still maintains the 3 things that probably we would get asked the most by practitioners who are trying to go out there and do the mission. Training, this is one of the things that the DoD practitioner does extremely well. It's something they're very comfortable with, but you can't just train. You have to say, I need to leave some sustainable stuff behind. Equip is harder to do, but it's probably one of the most frequently asked things that we were asked to do is, well, can you buy me some equipment? This may mean that you have to operate outside the spectrum of just DoD who may have limitations. And providing medicine. And I see some people in here who would argue that I think there's plenty of practitioners online today who promoted the idea that direct care may not always be the direct answers and stuff. So when we provide this capability, we have to ask ourselves, if I'm giving you this equipment, I'm giving you this training, but how will you maintain, how will you sustain this capacity into the future? And that's a long-term thought process, but it should be always thought forward in your planning, in the planning considerations. Historically, this has probably been the same issues come up there too. What I think has changed is practitioners are moving away from the idea of, well, I guess I'm just more comfortable training and doing direct care. No, I think we have to prepare ourselves historically, not historically, but future, to make sure that we are able to address all these concerns or know who the partners are to do it. Next slide. This one, I've always enjoyed this the most because it talks about bolstering civilian confidence in partner nation government. And I always have to ask myself, are we going into a country that needs it, or is that just inherently a responsibility that we have in this one too? What I like about current language today that was from the past, in the past we were allowed to either use host nation and partner nation somewhat interchangeably, but the difference is that we actually knew the difference between a host nation and a partner nation. And both from the practitioners in all the centers have always made a point to say, know when you're partnering and know when you're hosting. And host nations are not an effective term, and it's not representative of the goals we should try to be achieving, because it has that connotation that you're just letting me be here. But a partner nation means we're doing this together. And I always tell at our students when they're going out or on missions and stuff is that a 5-person security detachment is not a partnership. Make sure that you're working with those things. And then whose presence is more important? If it's a show of the flag, make sure we're doing that appropriately. We're watching our P's and Q's, we're behaving appropriately, and we're not creating an incident that will overturn the very presence and goals in here. At the same time, if the goal is to put a string or emphasis, make sure that those photo opportunities and social media opportunities show that there is a partner relationship between the host nation and the United States. Next slide. This one is something we've talked so much about historically, but it really came to light during the counterinsurgency, counterterrorism activities at the time, and that's lowering partner nations' susceptibility to destabilizers. This is probably the two things where it comes up the most, and I'll focus on this one too, is that when you're doing health engagements, there's two types of displacements that can occur. You can have an intentional displacement or an unintentional. The unintentional ones, when we're used to watching careful for itself, is that we've caused a clinic or a provider to lose income because we've gone in there and saturated that environment for the 1 to 2 week time period, taking that out of there. The intentional displacement is to deny destabilizers or counter actors the even opportunity to come in there. They're not going to come in. They don't want to mix it up with America, so they want to come in there. This is something that I think historically was not addressed in the 80s and 90s time period. It didn't really come into language until the 2000s and 2010 time period, because we typically thought, well, when we leave, what can we control? And there's a great adage that comes not from the military, but from the NGO community. It says, bottom line, if you're not getting care from you, who are they getting it from? And that's a question you kind of have to, ask as practitioners, or when you're advising practitioners out there, to sit there and saying, what's your goals here? Next slide. And then finally, and this is something I think y'all will apply for, is what are we doing this for? And we're doing this for United States national, regional, and military objectives and strategic goals always. This is important for practitioners, especially health practitioners, to understand that we're not there. We aren't going to necessarily change health outcomes, but we can have some effect in them, and hopefully some impact on that by providing sustainable and long-term training skills and equipment and capability. But ultimately, we must ensure that our military medical practitioners are well informed about the objectives and end states that are driving the mission to begin with. Why are we trying to achieve this? So this behooves us to communicate effectively with our line, both with the components and the co-coms, the combatant commands, on why is this engagement important. Ask that question. You have to ask that self. You have to advise them to sit there and say, that's great, I've got this great medical plan. What's my real goal here? What am I really wanting? What do you want to achieve here? And you'll find out that language has very little to do with a health outcome, but very much with a regional outcome. I do believe this. One of the things we talk about this is that we know this. Our actions by themselves may not change a necessary outcome. It's not going to lead to world peace or anything like this one too. However, we can all inherently agree that a country with poor health, a country that cannot find its footing in the health arena, is a challenged state, and it in itself is vulnerable to a lot of factors, including conflict. But if we can go in there and we build sustainable relationships, we build capacity, we build toward this, it strengthens them. It strengthens that corner of society to increase stability, which promotes growth, industry, and investment. And when we have all those things, the U.S. as a willing partner, and they're willing to choose with us, we gain immediately with freedom of partnership, freedom of choice, freedom of trade, and freedom of movement. And those freedoms return are exponential. It's what we're doing all the time, is trying to make sure that we can move and trade and communicate effectively throughout the globe with very little conflict. So we're not naive in the idea that if all you go up there and do a great health mission, you'll save the day. But in reality, when we do positive things and we look toward a sustained long-term goals with these things, with these engagements, we will get, we have a higher potential for getting return. And we see some strong effectiveness, specifically in the Southern Hemisphere and South American stuff. And that was a real quick run through, because I just really wanted to get through that, because I know Ramey and I wanted to be able to talk about some of these issues and some future issues with some of you as well. Next slide. I think that's it. Okay, so okay. Ramey.
No, that's great, Kevin. Thanks. And if folks from the audience have questions, just go ahead and put them in the chat. But I want to start with the idea of the ethical implications of global health engagement. And I think, you talked about displacing care. I think from a biomedical ethical perspective, we talk about, first do no harm. How do you think, or what recommendations would you give to practitioners as they're planning to make sure that they're conducting long-term impacts that are going to be ethical in the long run?
Yeah, I mean, you might be able to answer that better as a physician and practitioner yourself. I always think of it this way. I have, for all these years, I've always realized when we, as Dr. would say, it's an arrow in a quiver to a commander. But when we decide to use health, it's not inexpensive, it's not easy, and it's not without risk. In fact, there's a significant amount of risk of doing direct health engagements. And I think that that to the practitioners, the people who are actually going to cut, the people who are going to treat, the people who are going to provide medicines and stuff like that, they have to put that into construct. How do I manage this? How do I mitigate any negative outcomes? But one of the things that, from a futures perspective, is that this is where partner nation comes back into it too. The ethical responsibility is, don't do this on your own. Talk with the local providers. WHO and PAHO will tell you the worst thing we can do is bring Western medicines that are neither sustainable or accessible in a country, because there's so much potential issues later on where 6 months later, a person comes up and shows them the envelope, the little piece of foil, and said, the American doctor gave me this. And he goes, we don't carry that. And they go, wow. So we've automatically potentially introduced a lack of confidence. We've introduced certain things, but what would have been the better way to do the ethical responsibility is work within the pace of the country. I don't know if I answered that correctly, but that's certainly how I perceive it.
Yeah, I think that's good. I remember reading one time, I think it was an Israeli strategist that said, if you don't know what you're doing, you do what you know. And so, if we send a bunch of clinicians out to do a health engagement and we don't train them on how the best practices of global health engagement, then we shouldn't be surprised if they go and they default to doing what they're comfortable with, which is going to be direct care. I think we're also challenged because of our history, especially the use of med caps and direct care to connect with the population comes out of, the last, 5 decades or so. And so as we then tried to use medicine as a stability operation to connect with the population as part of a counterinsurgency, that led to certain activities that then kind of perpetuate in terms of our dialogue, in terms of what a health engagement kind of looks like. And then as we pivot, I think a little bit to global health engagement, the focus is different. And as we go from stability operations to global health engagements to build capacity, we lose the focus of what that tactical level engagement should look like. But obviously we're trying to meet the strategic and other objectives. So I think with your experience, like in study of like humanitarian response and what we've seen like with climate change and the use of the military as part of humanitarian responses, I think one of the big challenges of that is we haven't really figured out a way to meet the immediate needs of people as part of a humanitarian response without potentially undermining the long-term development of a country. But do you have any things that you would recommend as we go forward and as we see, you know, climate change and the military is used in that regard that maybe you learned from CITM that maybe kind of falls into that domain of preparedness and interoperability with our partners that we could consider for CGHE?
Yeah, so obviously the military will always play a very strong role in disaster and humanitarian response globally, if not necessarily down to the very specifics of healthcare capacity, but its capacity to mobilize and move large amount of equipment and personnel and supplies. I don't think any other country can mobilize as effectively as we do. But from a health perspective, this may sound a little bit controversial, but I'm not 100% sure. And I think even during our CITM time period, we used to take a look and saying we have to recognize that we are not long-term effective. What we have to do is create an effective corridor and a capacity so that NGOs and other sustained health actors can come in and rebuild that infrastructure. This is why mobilizing the Comfort and the Mercy makes a lot of sense initially, but it cannot stay on port. It cannot maintain itself as the sustained hospital locally, even though the local people may say, don't take that away from us. What we have to do is create the corridor and some breathing room to allow for other actions to come in and do this. Under Dr. Beeling's leadership time, when we used to look at disaster and humanitarian medicine, we would always realize that there are a full spectrum of that. And I see Dr. Jim Holloman on there too, who led the effort in Afghanistan on how we're doing it. And one of the things that I thought was impressed with those era time periods is that we recognize that what we have to do is bring their capacities up to speed. We have to get their militaries, their infrastructures back up to speed, not necessarily to relieve us, but because they are the first responders and they're going to be the sustained capability. This is continuing on today. So whether it's in climate emergencies, where some people may argue that's an imminent disaster and others may argue that it's a slow onset disaster in the making, we know that there are environments. And just recently, you and I spoke about one, which is the potential of the climate impact we have on remote islands and the impact we have on that. There's a regional destabilization effect that can happen there. If we lose those basing or access rights, who gets control of that when we're gone? And it may not necessarily be the actors we choose or want to be in control of those regions. So we can't ignore those slow onset disasters and our humanitarian crises, because in the long term, someone else is eyeballing that turf as well.
Okay. Have we gotten any questions from the group? Not yet. Okay. All right. So if you thanks, Kevin, for that thought. So if I was just getting started in global health engagement, I was, you know, a private first class, you know, thinking about re-enlisting, but I want to do some health engagement stuff, or I'm a young officer, maybe in the AMED or in the Air Force Medical Services or in the Navy. What one or two key things would you recommend to them in terms of personal and professional development to prepare for global health engagement?
Yeah, remind them why they're doing it. Learn the strategic language, make yourself familiar with, understand the line intent. If you don't understand the regional, national, and whether it be the operational objectives or the strategic or the tactical objectives, I think you're behind the power cord as a provider. So if I was advising from MSCs to NCs to MNIS to MCs to dentists, everybody else, you learn that. You have to learn that. You have to be able to, you may not be able to speak line, but you better understand the line and understand that. And I think the other thing too is do research, use forums like the knowledge management and the portals that you and your team are trying to develop that give access. Flood yourself with as much information. It isn't going to be there when you need it on the ground, but if you task yourself and your team to become well informed. And I think the other thing too that I want to add is that get away from developing teams based on what you have and organize your team based on what you were supposed to do. I see too much of this over time where, oh, it turns out, especially in the SPP programs or something like this one, where they'll say, oh, we just happened to get 3 surgeons who are going to be able to join us. That's great. Now we're cutting. Was that ever the intent to do that? Now we're organizing, equipping ourselves to support a surgical activity when we may need to go back and take a look at what was our original goal, what was the original plan. And that means cross communication between the components, between the services and the COCOMs who are directing and tasking these missions to go with. So that's probably the biggest thing, is learn why you were going to begin with and understand that. And telling people who are going to go to headquarters, you can trust these providers with that information, even if it's at a classified level. Let them know. I think physicians are incredibly adaptable once they know what they look at the country as a patient outcome and saying, what's my goal here? If you want to deworm a village, that's perfect. But as I always hear from them, it would have been better if we had also brought an engineering team in to build and improve their water source. So, so understanding the big picture, I think that's some big advice.
Okay, great. So we got a question from Jackie who's asking about, in the text box where she's commenting that a lot of times medical security cooperation operations aren't necessarily prioritized, despite it appearing to be directly in line with the theater campaign plans and commander priorities. He said, what would you recommend for GHE practitioners to do to advocate for medical security cooperation activities as a tool to meet the overarching strategy of building alliances, partnerships, interoperability, and build, maintain U.S. access influence?
You want to try that one? I see what you're saying, Jackie, and I agree. And I don't know, Raymond, go ahead.
Well, I think so. Part of that answer is that I think the Army the Army, because I was in the Army, but I think the military healthcare system in general isn't always in the room when a lot of these decisions are being made, and that a lot of times non-medical folks see medical mainly as, hey, the TRICARE direct care service, we're here to keep people healthy, as opposed to being an integral tool that can be integrated into the campaign plans, or it's an afterthought, right? I've had several of my commanders tell me, like, hey, Ramey, like, go do some of that good medical stuff to make people like us, as opposed to it being a tool, just like Kevin, like you mentioned, a quiver in the arrow that can be kind of very, pardon the pun, surgically applied to accomplish a goal. I think health in general, and I think that's where I think being able to speak the line and being able, just like Kevin said, and being able to advocate that medical, especially with our role as non-combatants officially, may have the ability to get in there and advocate. But I think a lot of that is you've got to be in those meetings where those decisions are made, right? You've got to be in the J5 meetings. You got to be in the S5 or whoever's doing your operations and plans to advocate for it. I think one of the challenges of this is, and I'll turn this back to you, Kevin, which is, one of the big challenges and criticisms of global health engagement is the lack of measures of effectiveness, right? Because in order to advocate for the return on investment, you've got to be able to show a return on that investment. Any comments on anything you've learned or you think the way ahead maybe should be in terms of better demonstrating the value of GHE? Beyond just, I think my whole point is that I think, everyone talks about GHE as access and placement at the strategic level. And I think we sometimes miss the measures of effectiveness at the operational and tactical level that could then feed up and provide more than just access and placement.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think when you highlighted as something that even here at the center, we realized, especially after the IG review, is that GHE is inherently lacking a standardized model of immunity practice. Interestingly enough, this isn't a deficit on the capacity to generate such a thing, but rather probably a shifting to get the militaries away from measuring performance as a way of looking at effectiveness. And I don't agree with that, as that, it's like measure of performance is great, but that just really mostly just tells me how busy a team was. What we need to help is give people language how to develop effective indicators and markers to know what's the effectiveness. But the great thing I tell about people, even doing internally their own little roadmaps on, I want to achieve this goal. To do that, I need to make these outcomes have to occur, and I only need these resources to do it. It's a roadmap. It tells you that if you find yourself collecting data, or you're only getting data in one of those columns, that means this is where your level of effort is going on. And it redirects your team to sit there and saying, we're doing a lot of training, but we're not doing in HIV/AIDS activities, for example. It wasn't just care, it was counseling and testing. And you find out that there'd be huge numbers coming back into performance about training and educating, but almost nothing about testing and counseling. So, but with effective M&E, road mapping and stuff, you can show yourself, look, you're doing really good here, but now next time you go out, I need you to kind of focus over here because it's important to do that too. So, so I think that's what sometimes gets lost, is when we just count numbers, we just really focus on that. But we've got to get back into the basics and, and figure out what were we supposed to be doing. And you don't need DoD to write an elaborate plan for that. You can come up with that as a practitioner on your own.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that's, and Dr. Shocker also said, that maybe also to answer the previous question, not distinguish, being very clear in terms of the purpose of what you're there to do, supporting versus strengthening activities, managing expectations. I think those can also help establish what those measures are going to be, both for performance and for effectiveness. All right, so Dr. Lucina is asking, obviously, not obviously, but he has also thanked you for your service in decades in and out of uniform. He's curious, given your experience and expertise in GHE, what do you see as the 3 greatest opportunities for this community practice going forward?
So I'm gonna let you also answer this, and thank you very much, Derek. It's been an honor to serve with you as well. And I think that's a good question. I'm very fortunate here at the center to peripherally and directly observe what Dr. Wilson and Adrian and the team are putting together here. And they put so much compassion and so much energy and so much expectation in it. It's going to be a joy. In a time in a world where we should not be lacking of information, it's refreshing to know that there are people who are thinking, let me help you put all this together. Let me weed out some of the chaff and just get down to basically what you want to know. And for the opportunities for here is getting the message out, getting people engaged. 2 things are going to happen. 1, they're going to realize there's a source here that will drive requirements, that will drive expectations from this team to know what they're asking for. But the other thing is it will compel them to share amongst each other. We have to move away from a written AAR system that gets filed away and we don't all have common access to. I think that's the goal here for a community of practice, is to not just be a forum, but an interchange all the time that's dynamically changing. And that's what I would, if I was just starting my career and opportunity, especially when I was at a COCOM in the components, we would have salivated for an opportunity to have access ports like this, because we just simply took from our own experiences, or we took the anecdotal experience of someone else, and that wasn't always transferred from mission to mission. So those are what I see as big outcomes. Go ahead, Ramy, what do you see?
Okay, well, I think I've got some other things we could talk about, but unfortunately, I think we're going to have to stop it there due to our time allocation. But I just would like to again thank you. Echo some of the comments of people in the chat, but also I know that people on here just thank you for your years of service. Thank you for taking some time out and reflecting on some of these lessons learned, sharing them with me and the group today. You always have a place in this community, and so we hope that even after your retirement that you check in with us and provide some wise sage counsel to those that are coming behind you. So thank you very much. And then so at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Miriam, who's going to kind of share with the group about kind of what's next in some of the community platform things.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson, and thank you all for joining us today. So a little about the platform before we go into the demo. It's a place of knowledge sharing, learning, and collaboration where all of our resources that are shared, discussion threads, and events will be housed there. It's going to be our main engagement mechanism with you all, and our communications will take place on the platform. We encourage you all to be an active member and use the site almost like a social media post, where a platform where you go in and regularly check it. And now I'll share my screen. So if you click on the link in the PowerPoint, it should bring you to this page. And then if you click agree and commercial login, it should bring you to the community of practice landing page. Once it loads. If you are not already following, you can, the group, you can go to the right side and where mine says leave group, yours should say join group, and you can select that and join our group. And also follow the stream and make sure that it's checked as inbox. That just ensures that any notifications or messages that are sent through the community of practice also go into your Mail Suite inbox. If you want to find out what people or community members are on this platform, you can go up here at the top left and choose people. It should show you all of the members, and you can just mess around with that. Going back to the landing page, underneath the welcome banner, as soon as it pops up, there should be key links. And under key links, we have our community of practice draft charter, and it's not yet shareable, but you can skim through and take a look at that. And then going down a little further, you'll see create, and this should, to the right of it, will show you all of the tools that you can use to contribute to the site. Status update will be used if you have any announcements or news updates. Discussion and poll will be used if you have any questions or topics. If you click on discussion, you will see title. You want to make sure that you select mark this as a question. It'll just help us track the answers. You can fill out the discussion body, and then we want to make sure that it's always placed to go into the DoD GHE community of practice. And then you can add in any tags that you would like, and then you would post the discussion. I'm gonna cancel that. And then if you have any resources, you would go over here. Poll is set up the same way as discussion, but if you would like to post any resources onto the community page, you would go onto documents. The only thing is that when you do have a resource that you'd like to share out, make sure that you send out a message to us first so that it can be screened by our team. We are working on a better way to figure that out, but for now you can just send us a message through the site. But it would be the same way, title, put in the document information. You can also mention anybody that you'd like and attach any documents. I think you can also add tags, and then you will publish. Last, we have events. So if you have any events, we highly encourage that you post any of the public events onto the community page. You can select that, put in your event title, the description of your event, start date, start time, end time. You again can mention anybody that you'd like and add the location. You could drop that down. I believe you can add tags, make sure that it's also in the being posted onto the community site, and we want it to be open to all. And then you would create the event. And then once that is created, you can go on underneath and see that under recent activity, it will pop up. Oh no. And you can also select calendar, your events, and anybody else's event that they have shared out will be here, and it will look like this. I think we can go back. So we really encourage you all to contribute to the site as we aim for this initiative to be member driven. Also, we are working on finding a non-CAC enabled platform to create a more inclusive space for those of us who don't have a CAC and want to join. But that's how you navigate the community of practice platform. And now I'll pass it over to Maria Echeverry, our communications specialist, who will close this out.
Thank you so much, Miriam, and I would like to thank you all for joining us on our first event. I will go over some additional resources that are available for you to peruse at your leisure. One of those being the DoD Instruction 2000.30 on GHE activities, which outlines guidelines and policies related to global health engagement activities within the Department of Defense. We also linked the DoD 5105.45, which provides information about the USU mission, authorities, and role within the DoD. We also have the DoD GHE Planning Handbook, which is a comprehensive handbook for planning global health engagement initiatives within the DoD. Next, we have the From Inception to Achievement African Peacekeeping Rapid Response Partnership, also known as APRAP Medical Program Report. This report details the progress and outcomes of the APRAP medical program. Just a little background, the APRAP was a Department of State program that worked to build the capacity of African militaries to enhance their ability to support the United Nations, African Union, and other regional peacekeeping missions by way of developing, enabling capabilities in the areas of logistics, engineering, medical, and command control and communications. All program efforts were designed to be full capability packages, which included equipment-related training, and training on required skill sets. CGHE acted as the managing partner for the U.S. Africa Command Surgeon for all APRAP medical activities. This program, in conjunction with the National Guard State Partnership Program and support from the services, was instrumental in building and strengthening the peacekeeping capabilities of Rwanda, Uganda, Senegal, and Ghana. So the link provided is only the executive summary, but the full report is available upon request. And if you're interested in getting a copy, please email us at cghe.usuhs.edu. Next, we also have the draft DoD GHE Community of Practice Community Charter, which is housed on MillSuite. And please note, it is not yet ready for distribution, but it is available to view, and it outlines the community charter for the DoD GHE Community of Practice. Some of our upcoming events include the Fundamentals of Global Health Engagement 1, also known as the FOGGY course, and it is scheduled for 15 to 19 April. It's currently at full capacity, but there is a wait list available for any interested participants. There will, however, be another opportunity to participate in the FOGGY 1 course for the June session, scheduled for 3 to 7 June. Registration is currently open, and we encourage you to apply if you haven't taken it already. And lastly, we have the Global Health Strategies for Security course, which is taking place from August 5th to 9th, and it delves into the strategic landscape of DoD GHE and explores various aspects of the broader U.S. government involvement in global health. And finally, to wrap up, if you are not a member of the Community of Practice on MillSuite just yet, we encourage you to join us to continue these fruitful conversations and continue shaping the future of our network. We'd also really love your feedback, so please let us know your thoughts by participating in our member interest survey linked here in the slides by Friday, 15 March. And if you'd like to learn more about CGHE's work, please visit our website and follow us on all of our social media on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn to find spaces of collaboration and championship. And finally, stay tuned for our next perspective exchange in early June 2024. We appreciate you joining us for our inaugural meeting, and we hope to see you next time.